Hello everyone and welcome back to the F2 show by Inside F2. Another weekend, another thrilling weekend of Formula 2 action and at one of the most historic circuits of them all, Imola. We're going to talk about that very shortly because it might be the last time we're going to Imola, which would be a real shame. But joining me for this one to reflect on round number 4, we have Formula 2 journalist Aaron Harper and Martin Lloyd. How are we, chaps? Enjoy the Imola race weekend, Aaron?
It's fantastic. I love watching racing cars around Imola. It's got such a colourful history, the good and the bad, obviously, but it's always great to see the drivers challenged. It's one of those classic old school circuits there. The mistakes are punished. You have to make your overtakes properly. You can't half-heartedly sort of send it and get away with it. You are pushed to the limits, and it's such a throwback, and I think it's such a good place for young drivers to hone their skills. I know they go there in several of the junior categories, so they do get to race there, but racing there in the top tier, like sort of Formula 2 and then into Formula 1, I think it's just something different about it. It's a very special place.
Totally agree. Special place, and we saw some special action on track this weekend, Martin, didn't we? We had a 6-car battle for the lead in the feature race. It was brilliant. The racing this weekend was, superb, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was fantastic. It was slightly different in a few ways to maybe perhaps what I expected, perhaps what we've seen in previous years, because the drivers, especially Alex Dunne, were being quite imaginative with where they were doing their overtakes. There were a lot of moves into Tosa. There were a couple into Villeneuve. I think there was one into Variante Alta. And so it wasn't just Tamburello. And I was worried that Imola was going to be one of those races this season where you have the cars kind of doing the minute 30 lap and just waiting to get to the same part of the track every time to do the overtakes, whereas actually a lot of the drivers were making really much more use of it, which was really good to see.
Yeah, totally agree. Lots to get into then. And I know you've both been on the press conferences this weekend as well, so I'm looking forward to hearing your inside knowledge and your insights. But before all of that, we're going to be talking about a 6-car battle for the win, as we've just mentioned in the featuring race. We're going to be talking about that decision in qualifying to finish 6 minutes early. What was that? We're going to get into that as well, because Aaron, I know you've got some thoughts on that. But before all of that, there's only one place to start, isn't there? And that is with our new championship leader, Alex Dunne, the Irishman, picking up his 2nd win of the season, our first repeat winner. Cool, calm, calculated. I think that was a very, very impressive drive, Aaron, no?
It was a super impressive drive. And he had the confidence to say early doors in the race that he was playing the long game and waiting for the race to come to him. But it wasn't an easy win. He had to benefit from slick work from his pit crew. And he said after the race that he only won because of the work that they did. And that proves the value of teamwork. You know, if you alienate your mechanics, they're not going to want to put that extra yard in for doing the pit stop that bit quicker. And I think we saw mixed fortunes up and down the grid in terms of the effectiveness of their pit stops. It's not to say one team is better than another, but some teams got it right on the day. They nailed their pit stops, others didn't. And you saw winners and losers because of it. But even then, Alex Dunne had to pass Luke Browning on track. He had to pass several other cars on the alternate strategy on track. He could have just waited for them to all peel off into the pit lane, but no, he got the bit between his teeth. He decided, I'm going to get on with this, but I'm also going to stay calm. He knew that it's such a difficult track to overtake on. There was no point putting himself in a position where he might get tangled up with a driver that he doesn't need to get tangled up with. But obviously, I asked him afterwards how he balanced the need for going forward and keeping the likes of Browning and Beanovic behind. And he knew what he needed to do. He said he could just stay calm, let the race come to him. And he knew that if he got an opportunity, he had to seize it. And that's what he did. Martin, you mentioned the overtakes at Tosa, the hairpin. We don't see many overtakes there. As much as it looks like a fantastic overtaking spot, and it is when you can get it set up, you still have to make it work. There was no sort of gimmies in that regard. And I think just the way the whole race played out, the tyres, the compounds that were brought this weekend, it really challenged the drivers to manage that push versus keeping life in the tyre. And that was something that Alex Dunne did really, really well. So when he got into clear air, he ran away, and we only saw him at the checkered flag, which is pretty much what you want to do when you're winning the race.
Yeah, you like an Alex Dunne win, Aaron, don't you? Because it means that you get to hear the Irish national anthem on the podium, which reminds you of the iconic Formula One Team Jordan, right?
Of course. I mean, they won the first race that I watched, and I've just discovered that they won the first race that you watched in Formula One. So that's something that we'll have together. It's great seeing Irish motorsport have someone to get behind again, because they obviously had the Jordan F1 team as almost like a national team at that point. And then Eddie Jordan moved away from the sport in like a team owner capacity. And they haven't had that representation. And it's great because there is talent there. And obviously they'll travel across the continent the same way as drivers in Britain will, and in Italy and in France and in Spain. And it's great to see Alex Dunne rising through the ranks with the backing of McLaren, and obviously delivering on the talent that he admits he didn't show in Formula 3, and now we're seeing the driver that he is. But Alex Brundle said on commentary, he's doing what Paul Aaron did. You give him more power and he goes faster. And he just takes off. He finds this extra level, and that's what they're looking for in these academy programs. Can you handle the step up? If Lando Norris or Oscar Piastri was to be unable to race, they'd be looking at Alex Dunne now as a credible option. They could say, well, actually, yeah, he's leading the F2 championship. Let's throw him in. He's shown he could handle that. So I'm not saying for 1 minute that McLaren are about to bin off Norris or Piastri, but circumstances, Behrman at Saudi Arabia, it could happen.
Absolutely. You never know what could happen. 14th in the championship in Formula 3 last year, Martin. I don't think many people, with all due respect to Alex Dunne, he's been absolutely brilliant so far this season, but I don't think many people expected him to be leading the championship after 4 rounds. But he's had the pace from the first few laps in Melbourne. I mean, his qualifying in Melbourne was brilliant. And, he's been quick every single round. Everywhere we've been, he's been brilliant, hasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really interesting thing about Alex's this season. Firstly, I will just say I was 2 when Jordan was not a team anymore, so that wasn't the first race I
Making us feel old.
But no, Alex Dunne, we know he's got talent. We know how strong he was in GB3 and Formula 4, and he got quite a late call up to FIA F3 last year with MP. But I think a lot of us thought, is this guy going to be able to kick on? Is he going to be able to challenge for the championship in his first year? And it didn't quite happen. I was talking to him in the press conference about how he had that difficult year, and he was saying he didn't have to relearn how to win, but he had to really change his driving style, because when there were opportunities to go forward, he had no option but to go for it. And I think that's what we saw in Sakir, was he was so used to only having that choice and being so not used to going forward and to getting podiums, that suddenly the opportunity's there, it's all or nothing. Whereas now he's kind of changed that mindset. I think what we saw on Sunday was actually similar to what we saw in the Sakir sprint race in a way, because Dunne was very aggressive. The difference being that this was controlled aggression. Whenever there was a chance to get past drivers like Esterson, like Marty, who were on the alternate strategy, Dunne made it work into unconventional corners. But he didn't do anything silly. He didn't destroy his race. He didn't destroy anybody else's race. And he drove really calmly, but also made those aggressive moves where he needed. And that was what I was most impressed with, was the balance that he was able to find between making those moves, because otherwise Luke Browning was going to catch him, and making sure that he didn't compromise his or others' races like happened in that Sakir sprint race. And I think that turning point, whatever happened when he spoke to himself in the mirror on that Saturday evening in Sakir, has totally revitalised him. And I think he could be a real contender this year if he continues this way.
Absolutely. An amazing 2025 so far for Alex Dunne. And he drove a McLaren Formula 1 car as well for the first time, by the way, in between Jeddah and Imola. And that kind of links to our next question. And it is very early to be talking about next season, 2026, and potential Formula 1. But Thea asks, if Alex Dunne wins the championship, since there's no McLaren seat available, do you think that Cadillac is potentially an avenue for Alex Dunne? And, you know, as I said, it's very early to be talking about next season and championship winning, etc., etc. But every driver has motivation as they go through the season. Could that be Alex Dunne's motivation? That there is a Formula One seat available potentially at Cadillac, and if he has a really good season, we've seen that McLaren let Gabriel Bortoleto go to Sauber if the option, when the option was available. Could they potentially do the same thing? Is that his motivation potentially, a Cadillac seat, Aaron? Do you think?
Possibly. I mean, I can see the sort of the lines being drawn between the vacancy that's there, but I just think there's more experienced options out there in terms of top level Formula One. I would expect Sergio Perez or Valtteri Bottas to end up in that seat, leading the Cadillac outfit. There's been a lot of talk of Colton Herta coming over from IndyCar. Not sure. They might be Pato O'Ward potentially. Very strong IndyCar driver, also McLaren backed. I mean, never say never. Look, Bortoleto went and won the championship and landed a seat at Sauber, so it's definitely possible. I'm not sure. I don't think I see it in terms of everything lining up. I think sadly for Alex Dunne, this is the season you don't want to win F2 because there's no room at the inn in F1. But, the way Red Bull and Alpine are churning through young drivers, there may be an opportunity somewhere else. So there's always a possibility of a door opening.
Just to play devil's advocate, I think a lot of the time you watch Formula One, you watch Formula Two, and think there's not going to be a space for a Formula Two driver this year, and then a surprise driver move happens. The heavens open. Now, I know there's not too many F1 drivers out of contract this year, but I think where we've got those 2 extra seats at Cadillac, I think there will be at least one Formula 2 driver on the grid next year. It's just who. Does Alex Albon make a surprise move to Red Bull if they really don't think Tsunoda's good enough? And then does that open a seat at Williams for Luke Browning? Or at Cadillac, what do they do? I think they might go for the route of having an experienced driver and a young driver. Now, I think if they're going to do that, they'll go, like you say, Aaron, for Perez or a Bottas or even a Joe Guan Yu. And then do they put Colton Herta alongside him? Do they go for the American option that is experienced in F2 and is clearly fast in Jack Crawford? Or do they go with the first Irish driver in a long, long time who has been nurtured by the McLaren Academy? I don't think that there's... I think it's reasonable to draw lines between Dunne and Cadillac. I don't think it's likely at this point. But I certainly don't think he's doing himself any harm, because you look at Oscar Piastri, who is doing quite well at the moment. It wasn't the right season for him to get a Formula One seat, but if you can prove that you're good enough in your first season, chances are you'll get on the grid at some point. So I really think Alex Dunne isn't doing himself any harm at the moment.
And they always say every moment you're not in the seat in a race, you're just getting faster in people's minds because they remember what you did before and they go, oh, well, yeah, surely he could do it. And it's just this wave of invisible momentum that takes you to a seat.
You're always as good as your last race, especially when you've won a championship. People don't remember, Felipe Drogovic's first couple of Formula 2 seasons because he's so dominated in his last season. And that's why he's always in the conversation when there's talk about seats. It's the same principle, like you say.
Yeah, let's wait and see what happens. I mean, Cadillac want experience, and Mika Hakkinen is still on a sabbatical, to be fair. So, could potentially happen. No, let's not.
Bring back the flying fin.
Yeah, exactly that. Hakkinen returns at long last to fill a Cadillac seat. They wanted experience. That is experience for you. No, listen, it's too early, as you say, to be talking about potential, who's going to win the championship in Formula 2, who's going to be... Actually, it's not really too early to be talking about who's going to be in the Cadillac.
He's changed his mind.
Well, yeah, I think Cadillac will want at least a driver secured nice and early, won't they? But... yeah, let's wait and see. Still 10 rounds to go in Formula 2. It's still a very long way to go. We know how quickly things can change. I do want to talk about, though, the 6-car battle that we had for the lead in the feature race, because it was brilliant, wasn't it? Luke Browning, Dino Beanovic, Arvid Lindblad, Fornaroli and Crawford all competing with Alex Dunne for the win. And Aaron, we spoke pre-show about this before we clicked the record button around Jack Crawford and Luke Browning. They came into the pits. They went one lap longer than the likes of Beanovic, Dunne, Lindblad and Fornaroli. Crawford was actually ahead of Browning when he went into the pits. Unfortunately, Downs had a slow stop. Browning came out ahead, and he actually took the net race lead in front of Crawford. And then Crawford, Browning obviously went on to finish second, and Crawford was down in sixth. I mean, does that reiterate the importance of a pit stop and how this is very much a team sport? It needs the whole team to come together, not a driver, mechanics, all senior management. The whole team needs to come together to help these young drivers to achieve success, right?
Absolutely. And it's what you were saying there made me think back to your conversation with Leonardo Fornaroli last week. And he spoke about the challenge of nailing the pit stop, like the approach speed into the pit lane, approaching the pit box at the right speed, getting the angle right, stopping on your marks. Like the commentators in Formula One on Sky Sports, they're always saying about the likes of Fernando Alonso, always hit their marks. They're never too short, never too long. You think back to Silverstone last year, Lando Norris, bit long in the box, lost himself time, potentially cost himself a British Grand Prix victory. And they're the sorts of things that can happen from a driver's point of view, that they just go a bit long in the box. They miss their mark a little bit. They're slightly out of line. It could just be a sticky wheel nut. We've seen it before. The 3-day pit stop for Mercedes at Monaco in 2021. All sorts of things can go wrong in a pit stop. And it's like they do it so seamlessly, so often. So when something goes slightly wrong, it is like a sore thumb. It stands out. But take nothing away from the mechanics in the pit lane. They are incredibly skilled people at what they do, because as anyone who's watched a behind the scenes of a pit stop, those wheel guns are serious pieces of kit. But like you say, Fraser, getting back to the point, that pit stop really hurt Jack Crawford's race. It was literally the difference between potentially winning the thing and not even being in the top 5.
Could have been the double.
It could have been, and he was very unlucky in that, and that's the way it plays out sometimes. That is racing. But what I think Jack will take heart from is the fact that the pace was there. They went the lap longer on the older tyre, made it last. They had the speed. They got the strategy right, because Browning came out in the lead, and if Browning and Crawford both come out ahead of Dunne doesn't win the race.
Yeah.
He's not passing 2 cars on the same strategy. And I think he would have admitted that. Passing one with the DRS, fine. But I don't think he'd have got past Browning and Crawford. So it would have just been a straight head-to-head. Obviously, this is all ifs, buts, and maybes.
Yeah.
But the pace on Saturday, the way he controlled the sprint race and managed his tyres, and then the speed he showed at that point in the feature race, very strong. And I think Jack Crawford can take a lot of confidence into Monaco and into Spain, where obviously Spain he won last year. So there are still plenty of opportunities for Jack Crawford to move up the order. He's now on 38 points, which it's not particularly close to the championship lead, but as we've seen before, and as you've mentioned already, Fraser, it can change so quickly. One bad qualifying session and everything turns again. And that's why we love watching F2.
It really is, isn't it? I want to highlight Luke Browning, Martin, because he obviously was the driver who benefited from Jack Crawford's poor stop and went on to finish the race in second. And I just feel like with Luke Browning, he is quietly going about his business this season, yet to win a race, but he has been, in my opinion, the most consistent driver across the 4 rounds we've seen so far. He's quietly, collecting the points. We've heard him in the press conference. He was talking to Inside F2 exclusively about how he's taking his time. He's taking learnings from every weekend. He's not trying to win every weekend. He's just trying to collect as many points as he can. And he's trying to learn from every weekend. And it seems to be paying dividends, doesn't it?
Well, absolutely. Let's just look at it in raw terms. We've had 6 races in Formula 2. 6 races?
7.
7 races. And Luke Browning's been on the podium 4 times. Yeah. That's abnormal for a driver who's coming into his first full Formula 2 season. I also thought he made a really mature comment in the press conference yesterday. He was asked about how much does he want the win, having come second or third so many times, and he was saying, well, actually, I'm not too bothered when I win, if I win. As long as I'm consistently racking up the points, that's actually all that matters. And he was talking earlier in the season about how he really wants to emulate Gabriel Bortoletto's championship in terms of he did not win the most feature races last year. Isaac Hadjar did. Now, Isaac Hadjar got very unlucky, but Gabriel Bortoletto put together such consistent point scoring that he was able to capitalise on that, and he was able to win the championship. I don't see why Luke Browning couldn't do something similar, because it's not even just in every feature race. In every race, he is consistently at the front. Even if he doesn't qualify in the top 5, he's consistently at the front. And I think that's what's most impressive about Browning. He might not be in the lead constantly, but he's always there or thereabouts, in a very similar way to Leonardo Fornaroli, who's not really threatened too much to win a feature race, but you can always find him lurking in 5th place, as it happened on Sunday.
To sort of draw an analogy from a different sport altogether, I watch a fair amount of darts, and some of the best players are the players that can score big, basically all the time. They're scoring 3 digits or above. They're banging in 180s, and that's what Gabriel Bortoletto was doing. He'd bang in the 180s when he could, and he'd just pick up the big scores basically every week. Luke Browning is doing something very similar, keeping that point score ticking over and just building momentum. And that's all you need to do. And like you say, Martin, it was it's so interesting to hear a racing driver say, yeah, I'm not bothered about winning. I'm just happy finishing 2nd and 3rd. Although, of course, he's not happy finishing 2nd and 3rd. They all want to win desperately. But he's thinking big picture. He wants to win the big one, which is the F2 title.
Can we rewind? Darts, Aaron. Have you really just brought up darts on the F2 show? Are you for real?
The synergy you didn't know you needed.
The World Match Play is coming up in 6 weeks. We can have another podcast if you want.
We're not doing a darts podcast, and we're not plugging darts on the F2 show. Aaron, I do want to talk about Luke Browning's teammate, Dino Beanovic. First pole position this weekend, the Aramco Pole Position Award that's been introduced this weekend, and also his first podium in Formula 2. Best weekend in Formula 2 yet for him, wasn't it? Quick word on him.
Yeah, definitely. Very, very good. I mean, we're going to touch on qualifying a little bit more in a minute, but
next,
he there you go. He delivered the lap, and then the red flag arrived, and that is the job. Get the lap in, because you don't know what's going to happen. There might be a yellow flag that ruins someone else's lap. There might be a red flag that means everything has to stop. So if you can deliver when you absolutely need to, you can give yourself all the opportunities in the world. And I think Dino will be very disappointed not to have got the victory come Sunday morning. But to walk away with a podium, that's a step in the right direction. The pole position, the pace was good. Just bring that all together for Monaco. If you can put it on pole there, and good luck overtaking the bloke on pole position, because it ain't going to happen, is it? Let's be honest.
Yeah, we'll get on to Monaco in a bit, but very interested. Listen, rewind to, you said we're going to talk about it, and I said now, let's talk about it. Qualifying, rewind to Friday, and we saw the session end 6 minutes early due to the red flag that was brought out by Kushmani hitting the wall, and that left quite a few drivers quite annoyed. I think Arvid Lindblad said that he was about 2 seconds away from crossing the line and being on pole, and he was, by the way. He was purple, and he would have been on pole position had that red flag been waved about 2 seconds later. So he was annoyed. I know Pepe Marti, Richard Verschoor, both annoyed. Richard Verschoor down in 19th. But the thing about Richard Verschoor is that he actually didn't look like he had the pace in practice or all the way through qualifying. So I don't even know if the red flag really did impact Richard Verschoor or whether he was genuinely just that slow. But either way, they're 2 separate points. Let's start with the fact that Jack asked the question, why was qualifying stopped 6 minutes early? Jack on our Discord asked that, Aaron. Why was it stopped 6 minutes early? I don't think we have any answers, do we?
So there is a bit of an answer in that they have like a buffer between sessions, and they didn't want to impact free practice 2 for Formula 1, and obviously Formula 1 takes precedent. I know, as much as I love seeing Formula 1 cars on track, this is my bugbear. It's a competitive session. Like Formula 2 and Formula 3, people turn up now to see those drivers race, and all those drivers are paying to have their seat and have their opportunity, whether that's money that they've gathered themselves through sponsorship, or they're being supported by a driver academy. They all want that opportunity to show what they can do. And as a fan watching on TV or at the circuit, you want to see competitive action. Obviously, a red flag is a necessity. Clear up the mess that's been caused by a car going off track. We saw it in the Formula One qualifying session. Yuki Tsunoda and Franco Colapinto crashing out and causing red flags. And obviously that impacted Oliver Bearman, who they went to VAR for it. It was crazy. So
I wanted to watch the Cup final. I got completely delayed by the VAR on Q2.
And then they had VAR in the Cup final as well. So
that was fine. That was fine, actually. They got it wrong. That's fine. I can allow that.
So yeah, back to the Formula 2 bit. They basically they didn't want to impact the F1, but if it was sprint qualifying, I don't think it would be so much of an issue, because you can say, well, that's a competitive Formula 1 session. That takes precedence over everything else. Fine. For a practice session, which you could have just delayed 5 or 10 minutes, which we've seen before.
Which happens in Formula 2 all the time, by the way.
Exactly. Yeah. And also, when they've had practice sessions washed out, it's made the Grand Prix on Sunday even better. So, honestly, I'd just give them 45 minutes and be done with it. Crack on, lads. Yeah, I just thought it was really disappointing that decision was made. And I completely agree with Jack, and I'm completely on board with all the drivers, that we all missed out as competitive people who want to see cars on track, drivers who are behind the wheel. They want to get those laps in. And that would have been a challenge in itself as well, because they'd have taken the very best out of the tyre. Could anyone have done a better lap on a used tyre? Or who stays in and decides, actually, I might keep this tyre for the race? It's interesting. Martin, what do you think?
For me, there's a very underrated factor at play here. I might be completely wrong, but I'm pretty sure that qualifying on Friday started 3 minutes late. Now, I'm not sure why, but I log on to Sky Sports, open it up, get my Word document ready to take my notes, and I see the inevitable F2 start delayed to 03 past the hour. Now, I'm not quite sure what that reason was, but I think if we had an extra 3 minutes, potentially, I don't know what the exact buffer time was for free practice 2, but maybe we could have got the end of qualifying in. And it shows that in F2, okay, you can delay the session, but you can't in F1. That's not to say I don't understand that Formula 1 is what most of the spectators pay to see. It's what the TV companies pay for. They don't want their Formula 1 sessions shortened because Kushmani's put it in the barrier and the recovery team are taking a while to clear it up. But I think, like you say, Aaron, Formula 2 is a proving ground for drivers in Formula 1. And if drivers, especially at a circuit like Imola, where it's difficult to overtake, if drivers don't get the chance to show exactly what they can do to put the car on the grid where they deserve it to be, then I think it's so frustrating. There's one particular driver I want to highlight is Victor Martins, and he's qualified in the top 3 at every race this season, including Imola. So you could say it didn't affect him that much, but I think Victor Martins potentially could have started on pole and could have run away with the race, such was his pace in practice and in qualifying. And so I think it was really frustrating for a lot of drivers. I understand the FIA and Formula One's decision. That makes it no less frustrating.
Totally agree, Martin. And I just want to touch on your point about Victor Martins. I absolutely agree that if that session had gone on for 6 minutes longer, I think we would have seen Victor Martins on pole, and I think we would have seen him. Obviously, he stalled on the grid, but we could have seen him potentially going on to win the race if he was sitting on pole position. You don't know how things are going to turn out, but shame for Victor Martins in the feature race, and a shame for Sebastian Montoya as well. Obviously, starting on the front row, great lap, did get the lap in before the end of qualifying, just before that red flag, and he confirmed on social media that it was a technical issue that led to him stalling on the grid, which was a real shame, but a great recovery drive nonetheless from him on the Sunday. I want to bring it back to Richard Verschoor though, obviously P19. Martin, difficult weekend for Richard Verschoor, and he's still sitting third in the championship. I guess that's the silver lining, isn't it?
Yeah, he's still only a few points back. It's still early in the season, but I think for a driver who is he has to win the title this year. Not necessarily to go into Formula One, because let's be honest, it's his 5th season, but to pick up a seat perhaps in IndyCar, perhaps in Formula E, or in the hypercar class of the World Endurance Championship, he really needs to win that championship this year. And I think it's going to be incredibly frustrating for him to have qualified 19th. He picked up a couple of points on Sunday, but let's be honest, that was because there are a lot of guys that were hanging out for a safety car on the alternate strategy, which didn't work out, which elevated him up to 9th. Otherwise, I'm not sure he'd have got those 2 points. So I think it was definitely a frustrating weekend for Vasseur, especially considering the speed that he's shown. I think he can maybe take a little bit of heart from the fact that Alex Dunne won, and it wasn't Luke Browning, it wasn't Leo Fornaroli, because Dunne has had a couple of non-scores in the championship so far, and so it maybe minimised the damage to the championship lead slightly. But I think the key for Richard Vasseur is he's got to go into Monaco this weekend and attack. We know how quick Vasseur is there. He was on pole there last year. He's been consistently quick there, and he was very unlucky not to win because of a technical issue last season in the feature race. So I think Vasseur, he's got to be one of the favourites for this weekend, but when there's only 14 rounds in the championship, you can't put 2 poor weekends together. I'm confident that he won't, but the stakes are certainly a little bit higher than they perhaps were at Imola for him.
Totally agree. Yeah, difficult weekend for Richard Vasseur, but two people who didn't have a bad weekend were Chris McCarthy and Alex Brundle in commentary. They were brilliant as always, weren't they? Shall we hear Chris's thoughts off the back of this weekend, chaps? Let's do it.
Hi guys, hope you're having a good show. My thoughts on Formula 2 at Imola at the weekend. Qualifying, showing how unpredictable this championship is, with Richard Vasseur down in 19th place. The sprint race, a crucial one for Jack Crawford. He's our top seed, of course, and that win, bringing him back into the championship fight. It wasn't the best of races, but it gave us a view of what the soft compound tyre could be like in terms of its behaviour going into the feature race. And that feature race was a thriller, wasn't it? 6 drivers fighting for the lead. The pit stops was a crucial moment as well. Road Motorsport doing a great job to put Alex Dunne 2 places up the order and into what looked like a 2nd place. A shame for the safety car, because I would have been interested to see where the likes of Pepe Marti and Joshua Dirksen could have come out, as they looked like they were going along very well. But ultimately, Alex Dunne showing a change in approach. He looked more patient this time, but still ruthless in his attack, making the moves at the crucial times. And that's ultimately what won him the race. He put the gap between himself and the high-tech drivers, and another feature race win. He's looking very, very quick in this championship race.
A good point there by Chris Martin about the safety car. Obviously, Pepe Martin, Josh Dirksen were they robbed a little bit there? It was really unfortunate timing for them, because they were progressing quite nicely on the alternative strategy, weren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that Chris makes a really good point in that the race yesterday was a thriller, but I think it could have been even better if we'd have had that shakeout. I think we saw in Jeddah, where Richard Vasseur was on the alternative strategy, came through and won. That's really, really viable, not just to be in the top 5 to get podium places, but to win the race these days. It doesn't actually matter too much where you start, as long as you're in the top 10, 12, there or thereabouts. I think it was frustrating, certainly, for Marty and Dirksen, but I also think that's the gamble that you take, especially at a circuit like Imola. It's very unlikely, with the kind of boundaries, the gravel traps that you have at Imola, there's not easy runoff for a virtual safety car like there is somewhere like Jeddah. I think that a safety car was always likely. I think that's the gamble you take by taking the alternate strategy. So I think for them it's disappointing, but I think it would have factored into their decision to take the soft tyre rather than the super soft from the start. I think I would have really liked to have seen where Marty and Dirksen could have shaken out 2 drivers that have consistently shown again that they've got front-running pace this year. Not to be for them, but I think it's an interesting insight into next weekend at Monaco, because sometimes you see at Monaco the drivers are so careful that there actually isn't even a yellow flag, because they know how careful they need to be. So maybe that strategy could work next year. It certainly did for Zach O'Sullivan. So we'll find out this weekend, but I think it could be a good insight into what might happen next weekend as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to talk about Monaco before we go. Aaron, anyone else you want to shout out on the podcast before we wrap it up? I feel like there's a few. We briefly mentioned Sebastian Montoya, but it was a great recovery drive, wasn't it? And a first point in Formula 2 for Sami Megatunif as well. We do like to talk about every round on the F2 show, don't we? And I feel like we haven't spoken about Sami Megatunif much this year. So good point for him on his first point in Formula 2.
Yeah, very, very good. I mean, he's had a bit of a quiet start to life in F2. So, credit where credit's due. He's done a very good job there. And like you said, Sebastian Montoya recovering from stalling, recovering from the disappointment of being on the front row and not actually being able to have the opportunity to run down to turn one side by side with Dino Beanovic. I want to shout out to Arvid Lindblad. I know he had a very strong weekend, but I think we haven't spoken about him actually on this show. Another driver quietly starting to put together momentum. But the feature race win is coming. Obviously, he got the sprint race win.
Sprint race
win. The sprint race win in Jeddah, and that's kind of freed him up. That confidence is starting to flow, and you can see the belief in the team. And Campos are starting to thrive again, and Pepe Marti's finding his groove. Obviously, had a difficult year last year, so Arvid is putting himself in the shop window for those racing bull seats that do like to make themselves available to everyone and anyone.
Blink and there's a racing bull seat available. Absolutely. So definitely Arvid Lindblad is building momentum in this championship, isn't he? And he is less than 20 points away from the championship lead now, which is he's building very nicely indeed, isn't he? So okay, let's take a look at the championship standings before we go. Alex Dunne is the new championship leader, taking a 6-point lead ahead of Luke Browning and Richard Verschoor. Leo Fornaroli, he's the only driver to score in every race so far this season. Now he drops to 4th in the standings, just ahead of Campos pair Arvid Lindblad and Pepe Marti. And the team standings. High-Tech take the lead of the team standings for the first time in their history, moving ahead of Campos. MP Motorsport, Rodin and Invicta sit 3rd, 4th and 5th. Another difficult weekend for Prema. They sit down in 8th place in the standings. They'll be hoping that their fortunes turn around over the coming races. And Trident scored their first point of the season, as we've just mentioned. Okay, chaps, Monaco next in the triple header. Cars back on track as soon as Thursday. No time for you guys to breathe and have a few days off, is there? Who are we thinking, Martin? I mean, Gabriele Mini is a 2-time winner around here in Formula 3. Richard Verschoor was on pole last year. Who's your favourite for this weekend?
I think Monaco is always a track that's a little bit more about driver skill than any other track on the calendar. Who is willing to take the most risks, especially once you get past the tunnel and into the quicker middle sector of the lap. I think that it's going to be a really interesting weekend. I think Martins, I think for sure, I think those returning drivers in terms of Martins, who has shown pace so often in this championship, he's got to get some luck at some point, surely. And Rich, please, at some point, just for his sake. And Verschoor, who was quick there last year, as I mentioned earlier. I also think that, like we were talking about earlier, Luke Browning and Leo Fornaroli have both been quick in every round, but I think it's actually very open this weekend and perhaps more open at other rounds than other rounds. If you can hook the lap up in qualifying, particularly if you're in the second group where more rubber has been laid down because of the different system that we have in Monaco, you could be in with a really good shout of taking the race win because it is so difficult to overtake. We saw last year Richard Verschoor in his Trident. Now that was not a car that should have been up and fighting for wins regularly, and Verschoor made it a front running one quite a lot last season. He qualified on pole, he would have won that race. So I think that if you can qualify well, then we could have a really, really surprise winner this weekend.
Aaron, can I have your 3 words, 1st, 2nd and 3rd in the feature race? Your predictions.
Easy one.
Quick.
Let's
Just
go.
give me 3 names. Let's
go. Mini, Lindblad and Martins.
Aaron thinks that Gabriele Mini is going to return to form. Martin, 1, 2, 3, 1st, 2nd and 3rd in the feature race.
For sure. Browning and Martins.
Okay, good stuff. Listen, that's all we got time for today. If you've enjoyed the show, as always, please make sure you give it a like. Let us know your thoughts in the comments as well, and subscribe for more Formula 2 content. We love hearing your opinions, your thoughts. Come and join our Discord channel as well. There's conversation going on all of the time in there. But from me, Fraser Ford, and all of us here at Inside F2, we'll see you next time.